So let's look at a case like this, open bite case, all right? We want to close the open bite, of course, close the spacing, align the teeth. For some people, this may be considered a pretty easy case, but there's a couple things in my experience in the past that would make this challenging. One, we have to get the tip of the central incisors corrected. Two, we have a significant amount of extrusion that's going to need to happen. And so there's a lot of things that, getting this case to 80 or 90% would be pretty easy, but that last 10% can oftentimes be very difficult. So we'll look here. This is the open bite that we need to close. This was our setup, and I'm going to walk you through what you're seeing here. So number 2, this treatment plan number 2 here is going to be a copy of our initial setup that we actually used on the patient, okay? So when we sent off this case, we ordered 15 aligners from the bottom and 20 on the top. And again, we actually only order 6, then we order the rest once the patient proves they're compliant. But this is the actual setup that we used, and I've duplicated that to show you. So number 2 is demonstrating, when we're working on number 2 down here, I'm going to be demonstrating how to do those chairside refinements. And you're going to be able to see that real time. We're actually going to do the chairside refinements. Treatment plan number 1 is the actual aligners that we ordered. So when we go back to treatment plan number 1, I'm going to be showing you what aligners we ordered. And then in treatment plan number 2, I'm going to show you how we created that chairside. So you can actually see how we set that up chairside, and you can do the same thing when you go to look at your cases, okay? So let's look at this case here. This was our initial setup. Again, nothing groundbreaking. We're tipping the teeth facially in the anterior. Why are we doing that first? We're creating some space there. We're tipping them facially because we want to have a predictable force and be able to use those attachments and make that extrusion predictable. So we call that tip before you dip. Again, that's in the other webinar if you haven't seen that or aren't familiar with that. So we tip the teeth facial first, and then we go ahead and bring those back. You can see on the lower, we've done a little bit of IPR to make sure we don't have interferences there. And we've added some posterior bite turbos to increase the intrusion of the posterior teeth because we are trying to close an anterior open bite. So nothing groundbreaking about the staging on how we set up this case, okay? So now here was our first refinement. So when we look at this case, you can see that we initially went from our start to our finish here, but let's say this is what the teeth look like. So again, this is a simulated example of what the teeth actually look like. So look up here, and this photo will show you roughly what the teeth look like in the clinical photos. Now let's go back to our actual plan and what we did about that. So you can see number 21 and 22 are our additional aligners. This was our chairside refinement. So she came in, we saw that the tip of the centrals was not correct, and we saw that we still needed some extrusion of those anterior teeth. I can guarantee you that these aligners were hanging off the edges of her teeth to some degree. Why do I know that? Because the teeth weren't down far enough yet. But that's okay, because as long as I can place force on those teeth, that's what we're gonna do. So this is how this chairside refinement is created. We're gonna add the additional keyframe, I'm gonna select those teeth, and I'm gonna extrude them further. So you can see here that those teeth are extruding further now. Great. We've overcorrected that extrusion. Again, there's still force being placed on these attachments, so I still have the ability to move those teeth. Now, in dealing with these centrals, again, looking in the mouth, they looked something like this. They were still tipped too far mesially. So what am I going to do? I'm going to overcorrect the teeth and tip them distally. So in the software, they actually look like they're crooked the wrong way. Now, why do that instead of do a refinement and try to do those same forces over? The teeth have already responded. When I set these teeth up perfectly, they didn't get perfectly straight. So they need overcorrection and they need additional force placed. If you wanted to, or you felt necessary, you could also place an actual power ridge above that to engage the attachment even more. In this case, you can see we didn't do that. Okay, so that was our maxillary chairside refinement. And so this is what the setup looked like, but you can see here, this is where the teeth actually ended up, and that tip was corrected. So what did we do on the lower here? So again, we had our initial setup. This was our final setup. But when she came in, this is more like what her teeth look like. You can see that the rotations on the lower right 1 and 2 did not completely play out. Okay, so what are we going to do? Let's go back to our actual treatment plan. Our initial treatment plan was to aligner 15 here. So you can see our first chairside refinement is from 15 to 18. And you can see what we've done here. We needed additional forces for those rotations, so we created 3 more aligners, and we did mesial facial on the lower right 1 and distal facial on the lower right 2. And ignore the power ridge for now because we actually didn't add that until the second refinement. But let's go back and recreate our first chairside refinement and how we did that. So we're at aligner number 15. We have additional rotations that need to be made. We're going to add a keyframe. and we're going to go ahead, grab that tooth, and we're just going to drag that facially, okay? And that's going to overcorrect and increase the pressure on those teeth. So we do that, and then we go ahead and we take a look and we say, okay, is that sufficient? Is that enough force based on what we're seeing in the mouth? And we can roll through that, and you can see here, now we've created our first chairside refinement. These are the things that I noticed at the chair when I saw the patient that still needed to be corrected. So we went ahead and did our first chairside refinement. We order the aligners. The patient picks them up and wears them. Next time we see them, they're going to be on their last aligner, and we're going to look again. Okay, so here's our second chairside refinement. So remember, we did our first chairside refinement, and we overcorrected. Our initial was here, our initial setup was here. We still needed additional movement, so we pushed those further. But now when the patient came in, we saw something different. We saw that they looked a lot better, but two things had happened. One, we had a little bit of intrusion of the lower right too, and there was still just a little bit of rotation correction needed in between the lower right 1 and 2. So this is what the teeth look like, and again, you can see up here, this is just a simulation of what the teeth look like in her mouth, okay? So we're gonna jump back to our actual treatment plan and see what we did for our chairside refinement. You can see here at number 18, that was our initial chairside refinement, but looking at where the teeth were, we needed to extrude that lateral, and we needed to a little bit of additional force to bring the lower left one mesiofacial, and the lower right two needed to come slightly more mesiolingual. So you can see here, that's what we did in the chairside refinement. So now we're going to jump back to our practice plan, and I'm going to show you how to set up a chairside refinement that looks just like this. So how do you do that? So again, we're on aligner number 18 now, and the patient has come in, but we need additional movements because that lower right 2 is not all the way up in the attachment. We need to move it up, and we need to move additionally the mesiofacial or the mesiolingual movement. So we'll grab that tooth after we add the keyframe. We'll move that mesiolingual. That's going to add the overcorrection there. We're going to grab this tooth and move that mesiofacial. That's going to grab the overcorrection and create the overcorrection there. And then the last thing we're going to do, again, is we're going to extrude that tooth more. Now, I realize that in the setup, that doesn't look right? It looks like that's too high up, but the teeth have already told us what's needed. Additionally, this is the point at which we added that pressure ridge. And again, I'm going to add that gingival of where the attachment is, because in the mouth, the actual aligner and the tooth is gingival of where the aligner is. So I want to add that pressure point gingival so I can engage that attachment, and I'm going to go ahead and move it, create a force to move that mesiolingual, and also extrude that tooth at the same time. Now at this point, I'm feeling pretty confident that the major movements are done, and I'm going to be able to get the attachments off. So we go ahead and schedule her to get her attachments off after she wears this last chairside refinement on the lower. And this is what that looks like. So in the setup, you can see this was our final setup. You can see the pressure ridge. You can see the overcorrections are there. But in her mouth, the teeth are aligned. Why are they aligned? Because we were able to put the appropriate forces on them, and only the forces that the teeth showed us that they needed by how they responded to the aligners. We add those forces via the chairside refinement, and the teeth align. All right, so at 11 months total, the attachments come off. Now, are we done with this case completely? No. But we've made a really great milestone because two things. One, the patient likes the way that their teeth look. The leveling, aligning, and rotations are done. So now we don't need attachments. We're going to use some bite settling aligners in order to finish up this case. In some cases, we'll wear those bite settling aligners full time. And in her case, because we still have a little bit of the anterior open bite to correct, we'll do that. In other cases, we'll have them wear the post-debond aligners only at night to facilitate settling. So even though we're not completely done, in the patient's mind, we are, because we remove the attachments and they only have to wear aligners without attachments and sometimes only at night. And that was in 11 months. So again, when we look at what our setup looked like, this is what those lower incisors look like in the setup. But when you look in the mouth, they're aligned ideally. So you can see here the initial on the top, the final on the bottom, and we have a happy patient.